February 4th, 2018. Welcome to another edition of Community Issues. I'm your host, Omar. Live here at the studio, I have two special guests. The topic of discussion is teen suicide. I have from the Mental Health Association, I have Mr. Jason Coleman, and I have from the Rockford Center, she's no stranger, Candace Davis. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, Jason, first of all, how would you define, or how's teen suicide defined? You know, for young people who may be watching it, they may have heard the term teen suicide, may not fully understand what it is. Let's start off with, what is teen suicide?
Well, they're typically looking at the demographics of 10 to 18 or 15 to 24, where they'll define as youth suicide.
Right.
But, you know, for those of us that work in the field, we know that it happens for, you know, kids that are younger than that as well. So it's not just teens, but there are also very young kids that take their own lives by suicide. So it's an act that where the intention is to not live. So it could be there's a wide range of things that somebody could do to end their life, but you know, it's defined really by the intention of them not wanting to live and then acting on that intention, and if the outcome is death, then it's classified as a suicide.
Right. You know, Candace, there are those who are watching, you know, adults, they may say to themselves, man, when I was a child, I was looking at the boys, I was looking at the girls, I was watching basketball, football, we was going to the mall. I mean, suicide was the last thing on our mind. So why there are teens out there that commit suicide? Those who may be asking.
I think there are a plethora of reasons as to why the thought of suicide comes into our mind right now, and I would venture out to say that the thought was probably there previously as well, but just not acted upon. And there is a difference because, as Jason can probably speak to as well, the suicidal ideation is probably much more common than most people would understand. As many times as we would meet with a client, the thought is there. It's just the intent that then can escalate the level of treatment that patient or client would need. Right now, sometimes the child or the teen or the youth is feeling so helpless and hopeless, and we're looking at today's society, what are considered societal norms at this point are playing a major part. The roles of the families are changing, the dynamics, the interaction of peer groups. Bullying is, you know, very prevalent now. Whereas, you know, as adults, when we were children, we could say, oh, we would all go outside and we could play together, but that's not necessarily happening right now. We don't live in a culture, in a society where it is necessarily safe for a child to be outside and just go play basketball or just go skate or just go to the local swimming pool. A lot of these activities aren't available. We have to look at transportation, the economics, so all of these entities combined can create this feeling of implosion for the youth or for the child. And then you add in the academic component, and where parents are sometimes applying this academic pressure because we don't have the finances to send our child to college. So we're saying you absolutely have to have a certain grade every year so that we can get a scholarship and things of that nature. And these unnecessary stresses and pressures that we're unknowingly putting on our children. So all of these issues are playing a part, I would say.
Okay, Jason, how are these teens committing suicide? I mean, what are the various ways? I mean, we hear the term teen suicide, but,
right.
but how are they actually taking their lives?
Well, I mean, it happens in a lot of different ways. I mean, males tend to have a higher completion rate. They die more often by suicide because they tend to use more lethal means like firearms and things like that. Poisoning is also, and that's defined like, there's a wide range of things that fall under poisoning. So there are a lot of different ways, but again, as Candace was saying, I think the important thing to realize is how often it is happening. You know, for every youth suicide, there are like 100 to 200 more attempts where they maybe don't, you know, they don't follow through, or that their attempt doesn't result in death. So, you know, this is something that is happening a lot. And, you know, when I started kind of doing some of the different trainings and things like that our agency does around training, I was really shocked to find out that the suicide rate is higher than the homicide rate. And that's I when I saw that and I started getting some information about that, I said, something's got to be wrong with this, because why am I not hearing about it in the news all the time? Why am I just finding out about that through this work? And and so it is really important that people realize that this is something that is very prevalent. Even the ideations, even the ideas. There's about 5% of the population in any year that has ideations or thoughts that they don't want to live anymore. So we're talking about millions and millions of people, over 5 million people. If we kind of round numbers, you'd say in a year there are more than 5 million people that are thinking about ending their life. That's a lot of people. So, so I think it's important to realize that it isn't just other kids or something that you see on the news. It's really important to take a look at your child's behavior, the behavior of their friends, changes that are happening in their friends. And it's not always a negative change. Sometimes it might be somebody that is going to be in the life of the party or is engaging in risky behavior that they weren't doing before. So anything can be a sign or a signal to those of us that know what to look for, that something is taking place with somebody, that they need some more support.
I want to talk about culture for a moment. Social media. I was doing my research on this particular topic. I saw one case where a young lady, she actually, they said she committed suicide on Facebook Live. There are those who were saying bullying on Instagram, on Facebook, is the result that one teen takes his or her life. And then also, it may be this pack or this challenge where you might have a suicide challenge or a suicide pack, and I'm like, wow. So, do any one of you think that the administrators, executive administrators from social media should monitor the Facebooks, the Instagrams, to prevent such acts?
Absolutely. I think that they have an ethical obligation to do so. If you're providing a platform for individuals to post and share information, then you absolutely have an obligation to monitor what is being shared. And I do know that since there were some incidents of suicide completion while on Facebook Live or Instagram Live, there are now certain keywords that will trigger, I think on Facebook, to a specific department, and then they will notify, I believe, the local authorities and things of that nature if the information to create the account is accurate in that nature. But absolutely, because if you, as I said, if you're providing the platform and it's almost as though you are condoning for internet bullying and things of that nature. So you do have the obligation, no different than if I'm a teacher in a classroom setting and I'm allowing 5 students to bully another student. If I don't do anything and that one student goes home and attempts or completes suicide, I absolutely have some sort of obligation in that aspect because I did not do anything to help prevent that.
And there are some things that they allow you to do now on Facebook to report, and it's a little bit deep in, you kind of have to go through a few little steps, which is fair enough, but it's there, where you can report a post and then your reasoning behind reporting the post, you can state whether or not you think it's because that person is thinking about doing harm to themselves or to someone else, and so that does trigger some different things, which is good. It is important to, we have to kind of catch up with the technology and what it allows people to do. You kind of have to almost, I know that the people creating this weren't thinking about that. We weren't thinking like, oh wow, people are going to be using this platform to intimidate other people or to hurt or harass somebody. So we do have to kind of catch up with making sure that we're making places as safe as they can be.
All right, live right here on Lisa Access Channel 28. You're watching Community Issues. The topic of discussion is teen suicide. I'm going to take a short break and I'll return. welcome back. Today's topic of discussion is teen suicide. Candace, a teen who may be contemplating suicide, he or she may be more confined to share their thoughts with a peer as opposed to an adult. So if you have a young man or a young woman who tells their peer friend that they're contemplating committing suicide, what should the friend do?
So I look at this from two different aspects because from working in the crisis background for 14 years, some of our calls were because that friend would tell a parent or a teacher or a school official, and we applaud that friend because it may cause a rift in their friendship, but we know that that friend was doing what they thought would save the peer's life. And I would always advocate for that friend to speak up. You can mend the friendship later on, but in order to mend the friendship, your friend has to be alive to do so. Speaking from a personal standpoint, my sister was 13, I believe, at the time when she completed suicide. And while she didn't live here in Delaware, I do believe that there were signs all over, red flags given that her mother, my other sister, her friends, her peers probably noticed and maybe did not take as seriously as they could have or should have. And had they done that, I may still have my sister here, Right.
Well, let's talk about the warning signs, that you mentioned. What are some warning signs that one can look at that may see something's wrong with my daughter, or something's wrong with my niece or my cousin or my friend?
Well, as Jason said earlier, it really just depends because warning signs are going to vary per individual. So you may have a child or a youth who is outgoing on an average, or is their baseline level of interaction, and then they may start to withdraw. Or you may have a person who very typically flies under the radar and is what they would classify as a loner, but now wants to become the life of the party. An academic student who no longer cares about their grades, someone who no longer expresses an interest in things that they once enjoyed, such as sports, academics, hanging with their friends, no longer wants to communicate with their best friends or anything of that nature. Even appetite, just noticing things with just changes in their appetite, sleeping, increased sleep, sometimes even being manic and not sleeping at all, is also could be a sign that there is something, any change in the behavior whatsoever should be looked at by the parent, a friend, anyone. If you're starting to recognize these signs or symptoms, I would say please start to have those difficult conversations with your friend, with your child, with the parent of a child who, you interact with, and say, hey, I just want to let you know something just seems a little different. Again, friendships can be remedied, they can be addressed again later, but if that person is not here to do so, you're not going to have that opportunity.
And I think that this is something that's important. Sometimes when we're trying to figure out what this looks like, it can look like anything. And if we think, oh, well, we didn't say that it looked like this, but I had this feeling. It's, a lot of what this kind of operates on is when we have that sense that something isn't right with somebody. A lot of times people are very uncomfortable with this topic and they don't know what to do. And they don't want to open that Pandora's box. Like, well, if I say this to you, and am I going to put the idea in your mind, or am I going to ask you a question, and then I'm not going to know what to do when you answer that question? So it's important to encourage people to know that there are resources. You don't have to have every answer to start the conversation. It's starting that conversation and starting that process of healing and hopefully opening up for that person that is really troubled and in crisis or going through something. That's the important part. Everybody can play a role in starting that conversation and helping that person to make connections with agencies like ours, getting in touch with Rockford. There are a lot of different places, and if you're not sure where to turn to, I mean, we tell people, call us, give us a call. Call the Mental Health Association in Delaware. Let us help you figure out who the best people are to get in touch with, what some good steps are for you to take. But it's important to know that this can look like anything, and it often does look like anything.
Right.
And sometimes it looks like nothing.
Right.
But we oftentimes have these feelings that something wasn't right, something was off, but we don't follow through with that, and we kind of figure, oh, well, we'll get to it later, or they'll get through it.
Right.
And that while that might be the case for some, it's not the case for others. So it is important to ask and to not be afraid of asking that question. Are you thinking about ending your own life? Are you thinking about not wanting to live anymore? Suicide, that word itself can be kind of scary for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. But there are other ways to ask it. It is also a difference to ask somebody if they're thinking about harming themselves versus are you thinking about not wanting to live anymore.
Right.
So it's important that people know that those are two good questions, but you always want to know, is your thought or are you thinking as part of what your thought process that you don't want to live, that you don't want to be here anymore? That's the part that you need the answer to.
In a few minutes, we want to get into prevention, so suicide prevention. But you two working in the field, sometimes it's a family history. You got a family history of depression, and you also have a family history of other members committing suicide. If you want to touch on that just for a moment, either one of you.
Well, I mean, knowing somebody that has died by suicide automatically puts a lot of other people at risk, because that in and of itself is trauma and stress, and that creates a lot of other dynamics. So so you are right that there sometimes are family histories, but that's not always the case. Right. Where because you knew someone, automatically that's what it means, right. that you're going to do that. But again, the prevention end comes on us all trying to be a little bit more alert to this, and also that we're talking about mental health. We talk about physical health. If I tell you, well, I'm going to leave this interview and I'm going to go get my foot checked out, you'd have one reaction. But if I told you, I haven't been feeling that great, I'm going to leave this interview and I'm going to go over and talk to somebody, because I'm feeling really down. Sometimes people will look at that person differently, right. and not in a positive way. And we need to have a better dialogue and support for people to get support around their mental health. That's a big part of prevention.
Right, and the Mental Health Association has a prevention program you want to share with you and your audience?
Well, we do a lot of different kinds of training. Some are geared towards youth, some are geared towards professionals in the field, some are geared towards like community members. Anybody, really a lot of the trainings anybody can take. They're not specific to people that are working in the field. I think it's good that everybody has an understanding of these topics, and we also do a lot of engagement where we come out and we can talk to people and answer different questions that they have about some of the different diagnoses and stuff like that, so they can start to understand what this might look like in their loved ones.
I want to give you two an opportunity to let the viewing audience know what you do in terms of career-wise and your educational background. We can start with Candace. Ladies first.
So I spent 14 years working in the crisis unit for Newcastle County. So I would do assessing of suicidal, homicidal, and overly aggressive teens.
Wow.
Then provide short-term counseling, and then assisting them to connect with longer-term services if they were not already. Sometimes that included making a referral to an inpatient facility or to a partial facility, which is typically like a step down from an inpatient, depending on the level of intensity with their treatment. I now currently am the program manager at Rockford, so I oversee the adolescent and child inpatient units there. So I'm working with the clinical director to assure that the staff are providing therapeutic treatment there for the population that we work with.
Right.
Interacting more with the children, so I'm not doing necessarily the direct hands-on approach, but my knowledge, passing that on to my staff is, as Jason touched on, the traumas, previous traumas, making sure that the staff is aware that those traumas can manifest in particular ways. As many people know, Rockford is a psychiatric facility, one of the few that accept children.
Right.
So we start at age 4
Oh, wow.
on up
Really?
to geriatric population, yes. So I have seen clients come in and patients come in who have the strong ideation, not necessarily the intent, but the ideation. And as he said, making sure that we're distinguishing between the two. Previously, from working with parents, they believe that superficial cuts and self-harm behaviors automatically identify as wanting to end your life, and that's not necessarily an accurate statement to make. In some instances, yes, it is, but in some, it is not, as it is a way to make the emotional pain go away because you are inflicting physical pain on yourself.
Right.
But I would like to say I call it my spidey sense, and I'm like 99.876% accurate, as anyone who's ever worked with me has said.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jason.
So again, I'm one of the community educators for the Mental Health Association in Delaware. I do a lot of the public engagement with talking to people about resources, talking to people about what mental health looks like, answering questions, doing the different trainings and things like that for them, for the suicide prevention and awareness. So we do those in the community and all throughout the state. And before that, I was a middle school guidance counselor. So
At one of the schools.
I enjoy working with young people very, very much.
Candace, you mentioned something that was very prevalent in the beginning of the program. You said that you are a survivor of suicide. So it wasn't you directly, but it was your sister. So families or family members are deeply affected by suicide, one who commits suicide, or even one who attempted suicide. So is there any services out there where family members can get counseling, because it's overwhelming for them as well?
I think any outpatient provider would be available for the family. Just making sure that when you're looking for a provider that you're specifying that you need a trauma or looking for the specific type of therapist that you need. You don't want to go to a therapist who specializes in marriage counseling to deal with grief and loss.
Exactly.
There are specific agencies that deal with grief and loss, and those would be an excellent resource to begin with. But as Jason said, the biggest thing is to recognize that there are resources out here. And even if you call the wrong one, they're going to be able to refer you to someone else who's going to be able to help you, because no one should ever feel like they don't have someone to communicate with or to call or to talk to, and not just their friend, but someone who is going to direct them and guide them in the appropriate direction to make sure that they're getting the help that's needed.
We actually offer a free support group for people that are survivors of suicide. And we have some other free support groups that people can feel free to get in touch with us about, where they're open, so people can go to them and have a safe place to talk about their experiences, and also to get resources and ideas for how to keep moving on, because it's not just about reliving or thinking about what happened in the past, but how do you make a path that is healthy and move forward. And so those groups provide that for a lot of people.
And how can people get in contact with the Mental Health Association?
So I think if you look us up online and you look up mental health in Delaware, we're like one of the first or second places you should see. You can also call the number, our number to the main office, 654-6833. And if I'm not there and I don't answer the phone personally, then somebody else will be there that can also kind of guide you and direct you towards those things.
Okay, on that note, I'd like to thank you both for joining me this morning for this hot topic, teen suicide. Thank you both for being guests on Community Issues.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
And thank you for tuning in to another edition of Community Issues. I'll be back in 2 weeks. God bless and have a safe week.